preconditions for collaboration. It is sad that we have not had a strong response in terms of action, thereby, confirming that indeed the United States is in many ways sponsoring operation back home. Now, I'll close by saying that the United States, when you are introducing it, you introduce it as the world's greatest democracy. So isn't it hypocritical for the world's greatest democracy to be the biggest sponsor of the abuse of democracy in Uganda? That's a question that I will leave to the United States, knowing that if America was led by a leader that will, be in power for 36 years, it probably would not be the great democracy, the great country that we all look up to. So the question is, does America want Uganda to be a democracy, a strong democracy like America, or do they still want us to just be as a pawn? As we discuss, maybe we'll attempt that. I thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Bobi. I like where you started because it leads me to the question I was going to follow up with, because you set basically a foundation that looks at what the US is doing now that is aggravating human rights violations, or somewhat showing that they could be doing more, but there is something that's not being done. So my question really is, looking at the future, what do you think the US could do to genuinely improve the situation in your country? If you had, for instance...
Would you kindly start the question again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so I was just alluding to the fact that you gave a good background of what the US is doing to contribute to the human rights situation in Uganda. And my follow-up question was going to center around looking at the future. What, in your view, is something that the US could do that could be helpful in improving the situation in your country? If you had a moment with the president, for instance, the president of America and the Secretary of State, what would be your message to them?
In one statement, I would say, do not sponsor our oppression. Do not pay our oppressors, because Uganda largely depends on foreign aid, and the US being our biggest donor, they know what exactly they are sponsoring. We could write a whole book about that, but our request has been precise. Please make democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights preconditions for collaboration, because it shouldn't be charity, it's collaboration. These are a collaboration of equals. Let it be about the values that bring us together: democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law.
Thank you so much, Bobi. I think I'll bring in Kawala into the conversation, because as an advocate for human rights, you've also seen many occasions in which the United States has pushed hard to defend human rights and punish human rights violators. But you're also coming from a country where the US, along with others such as the...
Maybe if I could...
Yeah, Bobi, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I want to thank Ka for being straightforward. But that's typical of African women, very straightforward. I am personally struggling to be polite in my communication because I don't want to sound angry, but I'm actually angry. I'm trying as much as possible to avoid words like hypocrisy, words like intellectual dishonesty. However, Ka represents me a great deal. We indeed are not asking the United States to save us. We are only saying, stop sponsoring our oppression. We are not asking you to come save us. We are trying to save ourselves, but we're being held back, because we are trying to fight to save ourselves, but we cannot fight against the American dollars. We cannot fight against the American trained soldiers and the American weapons. I will also want to add a word too about the issue of interest. And Ka mentioned it. It's about interest. Unfortunately, these interests in many ways come off not as moral interests. Because the first interest that brings us together as international community is morality, moral interests. However, General Museveni, in our case, and just like many other dictators all over the world, particularly in Africa, have learned how to play the interests of the international community. For example, in the context of Uganda, when General Museveni is drawing closer to the Chinese and closer to the Russians, he plays a blackmail card. He blackmails the United States, and you will find the United States rushing to deal with General Museveni in order not him to go deal with China. In any case, China and in many ways Russia, give aid, mainly military aid to Uganda without any condition. They don't put conditions of human rights. They don't put conditions of democracy because they're not democratic themselves. So that way, the United States seems to be falling in the trap. I want to believe that the United States knows exactly what they are doing. And it frustrates many democracy lovers to see that democracy and human rights is put on the periphery. This is just business. And I want to say that that is immoral. And also, the United States frustrates democracy lovers and lovers of institutions when they move on to deal with General Museveni as an individual. And I want to believe the same thing with other dictators like in Cameroon and others, dealing with an individual, not a nation, that, legitimizes the takeover of institutions here in Uganda. A few days ago, Ugandans were horrified by a statement that was made by the United States representative to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, that is the United States representative to the United States. She said a few days ago, and I quote, I want to quote, "We, the United States, still have a strong partnership with General Museveni. He has been and continues to be a strong leader in the region." Now, the United States, I wonder how it's going to explain to the world that it's not propping up strong men instead of strong institutions. So this comes at the backdrop of a rigged election. Last year, the United States Foreign Department issued a statement discrediting the 2021 presidential elections, where United States election observers were blocked from observing that election, an election that happened with a closed internet. I was the main challenger to General Museveni, but I was put under house arrest. My entire campaign team was arrested, many of them.
A bit more about what Museveni does to make himself so attractive to America. I mean, what has he done over the past 20 years to get this kind of lock on international support, where, as you said, he can commit the most heinous human rights abuses and still remain a key partner? What is he doing? How is he doing it? Are others following suit? Asks a questioner on our WhatsApp.
Thank you very much. You will allow me answer the question in two ways. First, what he has been doing. I can be sure of what he has been doing and maybe suggest on what he is doing. What General Museveni has been doing for the last 36 years is painting a rosy picture of his rule and Uganda. He has been able to smartly deceive the international community. You will notice that President Bill Clinton back in the 90s described General Museveni as a new breed of leaders. 36 years in power, General Museveni has spent a lot of billions of taxpayers' money in Uganda, paying lobbyists in the international community, paying companies to paint a rosy picture of his rule. And yes, he has presented himself as a benevolent dictator, as a Democrat. And part of our effort was to show, to unmask, to pull off the mask of General Museveni. When I ran for president last year, it's not that I was not aware of the situation. I was aware of the militarism, but because We knew that we had media on us. We wanted the international community to see what General Museveni is realistically. And we were able to show the world. The world can no longer pretend not to know what General Museveni is. The United States can no longer pretend not to know that they are propping up a tyrant. And we always have put a question that when Taylor did to the Liberians what General Museveni is doing to Ugandans, he was sanctioned. When Mugabe did what Museveni is doing, he was sanctioned. When Saddam Hussein did what General Museveni is doing, he was sanctioned. When Idi Amin did what General Museveni is doing, he was sanctioned. Why then General Museveni is not being sanctioned? We believe that the United States, in many ways, you know, it's looking at interests. And yeah, many times they've pointed at security and the war against terrorism, which we agree with. But we have told them time and again that they should deal with the country, not an individual. They should deal with institutions, not an individual. So I can say that I know what General Museveni has been doing in the past, lying and deceiving, and painting a rosy picture of democracy and putting up fake elections to justify that we have democracy. But right now, just last year, the United States election observers were blocked from observing the elections. The United States knows that besides all the massacres that have been carried out, besides the Kasese massacre, just 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago, more than 150 innocent citizens were massacred on the street, and nothing has happened. So allow me to throw back the question on the table, what General Museveni is doing right, and also to ask that, is the international community, is the United States, you know, enticed by evil? Is it enticed by violence? Is it trying to prove to us that we who are nonviolent cannot be supported, but those that are violent are supported? That's a question that I want to bounce back to you.
Thanks so much, Bobi. I think, you know, my answer to this is partly what Lizzie put in the chat, which is, I think one of the things that, you know, Museveni has been particularly good at is finding the one thing the West wants and giving it to them. You know, at one point that was a development partner. It was somebody who would lead on HIV/AIDS. Then when that dried up, it was Ugandan troops in Somalia. He's consistently tried to find the one thing that could make him attractive to a Western audience. And I once wrote in my book, Democracy in Africa, that if there was ever a kind of world championships